So after the last video I made, I wanted to get into a little bit more esports content and talk about some of the stories happening there and some of the interesting nuances happening. And there's actually a story right now unfolding that I think is worth telling. Um, Two very good players on very good teams, consistently competing for being one of the best teams in the world, but are almost up to double digit finals loss streak in a row. And there was just some recent crossover between those two worlds, and I think it's worth talking about. So why don't we get into it? So why don't we first start with the player that probably more widely known, Monesy, who's a Counter Strike professional, who was on Team Falcons, and I think more people know about it because Team Falcons right now has a pretty lackluster record in finals. Let's just say that. And Monesy, for his part, is now up 8 finals losses in a row, and I mean, that is just incredible if you think about it, not just because of the number, but because that means that he has to be in those finals consistently, right? That's just from joining Falcons, which is, I think, about 2 years, something like that, ago now. And they've been in all those finals and have just lost them. And it kind of makes sense with Monacy a little bit. I mean, they come up against Vitality, some other great teams like Furia. And then, I mean, unfortunately, just as well, it just seems like things just don't go right for them. And that's how it goes. But the player that I wanted to talk about next is my kind of dark horse esport, and that's Dota 2. And there's a Dota 2 player called Nightfall who's the carry for Aurora. And recently he put on his, I think his Steam profile, it was a little bit of crossover mode Monacy, right? Because Monacy is now 0-8 in grand final for his last 8. Nightfall has lost 9 in a row. And again, that's a little bit more shocking because I think Dota is a little bit more competitive right now. Like, it depends on metas, depends on what team shows up on the day. And so that's just amazing that two players who are really good, they're clearly good enough to get there, are now at 0-8 and 0-9 respectively. And that got me thinking, how how rare is it? I mean, that can't be normal. And so I looked at normal sports, just IRL sports, because I think it's a little bit easier to track the advanced stats for. And if you look at it, the average finals appearances or championship appearance, whatever you want to say, is about 2. Reason for that, I think, is, makes sense once you think about it a little bit. Once you get past 2, there's a pretty high likelihood you're not going to win, right? It's basically 1, 2, or 3, and then past that, it's just 0, right? Like, they never win a finals appearance after that. And that's because there's windows, right? Championships are hard to win. When you have 30 teams or however many teams competing for something, it's going to be hard to actually win it. And so that's why for most players, just to get there, if they don't win it the first time, generally their team was obviously good enough to make it that number one time. They're going to be back there and they're going to win it eventually. If we take a look at this graphic here, you'll notice that in professional sports, it's generally a drought of 1 or 2 championships. When we take a look at this graphic, the players here mostly won it on their first, second, or third try. And Jerry West up there is the real example of 6 losses in a row before finally getting one. And these players here are some of the best players of all time. And there's a valid argument that there's only one championship per year in these professional sports. But you got to remember that a lot of these players had very long careers and had lots of opportunities. And so for Monesy and Nightfall to already be at those 8 and 9 streaks of losses in a row, it's just out of the ordinary. In fact, it's so out of the ordinary that if we then look at players who never won, the longest we have there is 8. Reason being is those players were on good enough teams to continuously and routinely get there, but just were really unlucky. Now, to reinforce this narrative of good teams and good players, I want to take a look at the histories of Nightfall and Monesy. If we take a look at Nightfall first, as we saw earlier in that graphic, Aurora is second at the moment, and I know that they've been top 10 or probably closer to the top 5 teams for a couple years running now. And if you look at his career, he's been playing since 2018 and is up over $1 million because of the Dota prize pools. Clearly, he's a good player and has won before. And it's a similar story for Monesy. Falcons is top 10 and has been for at least a year. Ever since I can remember, Falcons has been in the top 10 and been competing. And Monesy, for his efforts, been playing a long time and has almost $1 million. And you see all of the trophies there. Clearly, these players have had success, these teams have had success, and they've been in the hunt for a long time. To actually get there and to actually, get over the hump, which I believe these players to be good enough to do, right? That's why I'm making the video. I don't really feel like I'm dogpiling or anything like that. I feel bad. Monesy and Nightfall are both on really good teams. They're both really good players. I imagine at some point luck's gonna go their way and they'll probably get one. I'm assuming. Hopefully, hey, this isn't a jinx, but I'm pretty sure they'll get one, and it's just gonna be a fun footnote. But as it's happening, I just wanted to get in on it and say how crazy that is that they haven't lucked into one already. So I think it's probably a good idea to check their opponents and kind of see what happened because I think it's just interesting how it all happened, right? We got to look at the nuance. Once you jump into each of the series, the 0 and 9 sounds a little less egregious and makes a little bit more sense. If you take a look at each of these series, all of these teams that they're playing against and obviously losing to are very good. You have Gaming Gladiators back in 2023 when they were top of the world. Team Spirit has been a great team and has won a bunch of TIs for however long. Team Falcons has, been a incredibly strong team with a bunch of really good players for a few years now. And so when you look at this, you notice that all of these teams are extremely top teams. The ones that, maybe recently you could talk about Paravision being somewhat beatable, but even those games, they're just super close games that didn't go Aurora's way. And it's a similar story when you look at Monesy then. You'll notice very early on, Monesy actually did lose to Falcons when he was on G2, and that kind of started this whole trend. But then a bunch of vitality, Furia was there. Then a couple bad losses after that with Paravision and Legacy. But for the most part, when you look at each of these games, Monesy plays really well, and they come up against teams who it was their moment. And that whole trend is actually an even more interesting story because somebody's got to lose. And oftentimes, you can look at sports almost as a drama in and of itself. And unfortunately, a lot of times Monesy is on the team, and a lot of times it's Falcons who is almost the villain in the story. They're not the Cinderella, they're the stepsisters, and they lose every time. So, like I said, this is just a kind of unfolding story that I thought was really interesting within esports at the moment, and I wanted to pass along and kind of get you guys in there. And hopefully, maybe we could team up together and start rooting for these guys, right? I'm at a point now where I want Monaco to win. I know Falcons has a history and all their stuff, but it's like I want Monacy at least to win and to kind of like break the curse. And for Nightfall now, very much the same thing, right? As fun as it is to see somebody go 0 and 9, it's like okay, I think being in all these grand finals in a row, they deserve it. Like let's see them get it. I hope that now you're going to be looking out for players as well and be looking out for the stories. If you wouldn't mind, if you enjoyed it, give a like, subscribe, anything like that would really help. We're at the very start of this channel, so if you find it interesting or have any feedback, I'd love it. I will take any feedback at this point, trying to see what people like, what people don't like, and kind of steer in that direction. So I'd be very appreciative of any kind of feedback you could offer, as well as in the comments. I mean, if you have any stories right now that you're following, if you have any IRL sports or esports stories that you think are really interesting that are happening right now, put them down there. Let me know what you think, and maybe we could continue the talk there. Or hey, maybe it's another video. But see you next time. Thanks for tuning in. Bye bye.